So I think Holly Black giving us a very distinct detail of Oak drinking a coffee made out of like roasted dandelions and picking out acorn cakes. One, it fits with the vibes of the world, like the very naturalistic, wild, wooded nature of Elfheim. But also, I think that there is more to it. For example, dandelions represent resilience, hope, strength, and like healing. And Oak has to prove himself to be resilient in this moment to get past all the hardships, but he also is healing himself through this hardship. And I think that goes hand in hand with the acorn cakes because acorns are the seeds of oaks. And this is Oak. It's like he's digesting himself. He's trying to figure out who Oak is and what is happening, or like he's comparing to like who Oak was and what he needs to grow and become next. And it fits with the rest of the paragraph because the rest of the paragraph is him with his spots flying between Ren and his arms, with Lady Elaine and the capsizing of his plans, circling back then to what he learned about the ghost. There's so much going on there. There's so many roles he is playing just between the three here, and how they are not, in sync, that they're kind of competing against each other, and what choosing any of the paths there and going all in, how it affects the other. So like in this moment, I think he has to realize that like he can't have it all, or at least he can't play all these different roles. And as he has told us previously, he doesn't know who he is anymore because he's been playing all these different roles and what these mean. So like again, Ren is leaning into love and openness. Lady Elaine, though, is trying to become what his family is, which is kind of schemers and killers. And the ghost then is leaning into what Hyacinth is, which is, consumed by revenge. Oak then wonders how can the ghost look at him? If it wasn't for sheer luck and Arenia, he would have been dead. The ghost would have been his murderer. And I think part of it is because of his loyalty to Dane, because technically Oak is Dane's blood. And not only that, he looks so much like Oak if you look at the Frostbite Studio art, which has been approved by Holly Black. So I think he can almost forget who Oak initially is and almost see him as Dane. But the other point is to show that you can recontextualize anything. He can recontextualize Oak as not being something standing in Dane's reign, but being able to fulfill Dane's, original goals. Like, who knows what the ghost is up to? And the thing is that I don't think we're gonna know anytime soon unless it comes up in like maybe a future story of Taryn and we get something of Taryn and the ghost, because I don't know what the ghost genuinely is up to here. I don't know if he was scheming. I don't know how he saw Oak, what his relationship was. In my opinion, my headcanon, I think the ghost saw Oak as Dane. If you've seen some of my previous stuff, you know that I am sympathetic towards Taryn, and I think others view her in such a negative light. And I think Holly Black is bringing that up here too, with her pointing out that Taryn's betrayal strikes Oak the most sharply. Jude has always been constrained by position in politics, while Maddox has always been constrained by his nature. Oak thought of Taryn as the kind-hearted one, the one who wanted a gentler world. One, he has given excuses for Jude and Maddox, who are equally to blame. They equally could have told him about the ghost and what was happening. That's not fair because they're not actually as constrained as he thinks they are. And it's leaning into Maddox. He's actually has been gaslit and believes in Maddox's gaslighting that his actions are justified and excusable because of his nature, which is not, as we saw with Grandma Mog and Queen of Nothing. But then accusing Taryn, because Taryn is equally constrained as Jude, just in a different way. And that's not fair. And like the thing is also that Taryn is putting on a mask just as Oak is putting on a mask. She's putting on a character of being gentle-hearted, but he is fully aware that Taryn had murdered her husband. So why do you keep thinking that she is gentler and want a gentler world? And I think like it's not fair because I think having been close to Taryn with Jude and then seeing her in her own novella, you can see that she views the world very similarly to Jude. It's just how they interact with it is different. And have a higher hopes. Like I think she does hope that they wouldn't have violence, but she isn't obviously against the violence as you've seen. So I don't know. Like I think it's not fair, and I think Holly Black's pointing out too, like the hypocrisy that everyone is willing to give Jude and Maddox excuses and believe their excuses when they equally are capable of doing the same thing as Taryn or being as good as Taryn, and like Taryn doing something equally as bad as them is villainized, and that's not fair. So Oak starts kicking the table, splintering the wood, and he notes to himself that if his mother walked in, she would claim him for being childish. And I think that's not fair because this is the only outlet for him to get out his frustration. And like, just there's so much going on. And the thing about this family, like Maddox, Jude, Taryn, all of them, they love each other and they show their love and loyalty with their actions, but they're terrible with their words. They do not talk about anything with one another. And we've seen it throughout the original trilogy. Think back to it. All the problems that they have is because they cannot communicate with one another because they've never learned to communicate with one another. And that is their problem. That is their downfall. And that leads to their frustration. That leads to these problems. That leads to Oak right now feeling like he has just all this pent up energy and confusion because he has no one to turn to talk about it with. His family might love him, but they are equally dysfunctional as a lot of other families, like Cardin's, for example. And here we're seeing the hitch in Jude's original plan, with Oak noting that ever since he could really understand why he had to put the blood crown on Cardin and live with Vivi and all these things, Oak wasn't able to think of his sisters without being aware of the debt he owed them. Once again, in this world of Alfheim, it is a give and take. It is so ingrained into their society that it affects their every upbringing. Like, it's like the kid that learned to not tell a lie and then get really, really uncomfortable and really, really guilty and get like nauseous if they have to tell a lie or something like that. And like we saw with Tatterfall, for example, like she had to work at her servitude for Maddox because he didn't kill her husband when it was deserved. And even when Jude tried to release her early, she wouldn't do it because she needed to work it off. It's very important in this world. And what Jude forgets as a human is how important and how ingrained that is in this world. She knows it and she understands it, but she doesn't know it because it doesn't affect her like that. It's that example of like a kid learning to lie. Like to her, she's like, I lie, but like to him, it like physically kind of hurts him. And that's why he's doing all these quests, doing all these schemes, doing all these characters, because he feels this innate need, even though he may not be very conscious of this, to return the debt. And this debt feels like it's out of his reach. Like there's nothing he can really truly do to return this debt. And even though he doesn't want this position, he feels like he has to return this debt. And then I love that we were reminded of Oak's age and naivety and his, even though he hasn't had the most comfortable life, it has been more comfortable. That he notes that Ren has been existing as survival, and he thought taking her away from the Citadel and coming to Alfheim, which is more so full of wine and songs and lazy indulgences, would change things. But one, she's been living on survival mode for so long that it would be hard for her to stop. It's like a soldier who's been at war for so long and then all of a sudden has to come back home, and that's why they sometimes develop PTSD. It's really hard to switch that part of your brain off. But also it's showing that he is kind of ignorant of the dangers. Like he's aware of the dangers, but isn't aware of the dangers of Alfheim and why someone like Ren would still be in survival mode there. Even Jude was in survival mode in Alfheim. So Oak wonders if Ren is trying to tell him something, like there's something going on, there's a greater wrongness that she was trying to communicate. And I think that's why I love this book, and like same with Game of Thrones, is that there's so much being unsaid while being said, if that makes sense. Like there's so much being said underneath the actual words being said out loud. And it's so fascinating, this world where they can't lie, that they have so many hidden meanings beneath their words, and you don't know if they're being straightforward or if they're trying to tell you something about telling you something. And like it's so convoluted and I love it, but like yeah, you don't know. Like that's, I mean, part of also the double-edged sword of this is that, like, for example, Ren doesn't know if he's being straightforward and genuine when he is sometimes being straightforward and genuine with her, and other times he's trying to communicate something with her and she doesn't know if he's trying to communicate in a way to be helpful or communicate in a way to set her up for a big joke. And that's why, like, I think this is such a fun story, because you could sit here and do what I'm doing, which is just picking apart. And for example, Cardin, you don't know if he's genuinely being a bully or if he's caught up in something or if he's, you know, simping for Jude. But like if you look at the same clump of words, you can see it in all three lights and it works. So like, yeah, that's why I love all of her Holly Black's books. I don't know how to interpret Tatterfell's words of even Oak notes that verse on Inseer, that this is fake. Like I don't know if I should interpret like Tatterfell as like a nationalist, that she deems everyone that isn't a fairy from Elflame lesser, because I definitely got the impression of her in the original series that she, even though she took care of mortals like Jude and Taryn, she did not seem like she enjoyed it. And she only did it out of the rules of the society, that she upholds these old-fashioned rules, that she probably believes in these rules. But the farce on Incir, I think that maybe she's recognizing that on both sides is a farce. That there are those like Jude and Arenia that do not want this marriage to come into fruition. But then there's Bogdana on the other side, that she is probably scheming something in Tatterfell, recognizing that, or at least wants to believe that is the case, because Bogdana is other. She is a hag. Ren is other. She is a monster. And that is not good enough at Elfhame, as we've been seeing with a lot of people within Elfhame. They're very nationalist and elitist and a lot of isms. Tatterfell's suggestion that Oak should marry the new Queen of the Undersea, aka Narcia, even though she is older, because that is a better alliance. And if he doesn't do it, then the alliance goes to someone else. And it's so fascinating to me that they're so prejudiced against Ren and her people, when like the Undersea are so other. They're so much different than them. They're of the sea. They don't even belong on land. And you can see there's a strained relationship between the Undersea and Alfheim and like the folk, but the only reason why it's not worse is because the Undersea is powerful and big, whereas Ren's court is small and not as powerful besides her. And so like in my head, the way to contextualize it is that like I think Ren would be considered probably like a princess of Luxembourg, or like the princess of like one of the smaller Germanic principalities during those times, like during like, you know, the Regency and Georgian era. I think that. Whereas imagine if Narcia is like France. While they may not like France and they fight with France a lot, England, they often marry between each other because that is a strong, powerful alliance, or at least that's what they thought. So like that's how I'm contextualizing this. So it makes me so sad that Oak genuinely is doubting Jude, that while he thinks that Jude wouldn't, you know, she doesn't usually expect much from him, he does think there's a possibility that she would arrange a marriage between him and Narcia. And I think it's because they don't communicate. He doesn't realize all that she has done is to give him his freedom and a little bit more choice, not to be puppeted by Maddox. However, he is equally not wrong to believe this, because Jude still is forcing him to have the throne. Despite it prolonging it, it's still gonna happen at some point, even though he was never asked if he wanted it in the first place. Same with Cardan. So she's not too dissimilar from Maddox. They're very similar in the sense that they're forcing people that don't want to be on the throne. It's just then she at least gives them a little bit more agency than Maddox would have. But like I can see why he is doubtful that maybe Jude would do this, because Jude is very strategic. She is very much like Maddox in that sense too, where like maybe she sees it stronger for Alfheim if she does unite them in that front. So I don't think Jude would. I think Jude would definitely leave it up to him when it comes to marriages, for example, but still, I don't, disagree with his thought process here, and that's sad. And again, it comes down to the fact that they don't communicate in this family. Here's the thing, this read through, I am a lot more suspicious of Jack of the Lakes. Now, we interacted with him more in the first book, but like now, like him being present here before they go to Incir, I don't know, like I just think that he's up to something. Like he is of the Undersea, that is his court. So who's to say that he's not here to throw a wrench in a plan to maybe steer Oak some way to help or hinder some other plan? Who knows if Maddox didn't recruit him? Maddox did at one point have an alliance with the Undersea, though who knows what it is now, since, a decade later. Who knows if Maddox got to him while he's been technically in prison during that time between Maddox reaching Alfheim and then Oak reaching Alfheim. Again, I'm just always suspicious of Maddox, but I'm very suspicious of Jack of the Lakes, because I feel like he is putting on an act. He is not that dumb. And because look at every other character we've met in this story. Very rarely are the ones that present themselves as dumb are actually dumb. Case in point, Valmorin, the previous Seneschal, presents himself as an idiot and lost, his rocker, but he's actually gives some really sound advice. They're just veiled in riddles. When Taryn sees Oak riding Jax, he goes, "Are you insane trusting him?" And it made me realize that like Oak is very different than like say Jude. Jude is suspicious of everyone. And yet I think it's because of his family that Oak is so open to people, open to trusting, and open to giving people second, third, fourth chances. And I think it's because of his family, because look at them, look at Maddox, look at Jude, look at all the shit that they've done, but yet the families continue to give them second, third, fourth chances. And not just Jude and Maddox, but they are definitely the most guilty of this. But like, Taryn and Vivi and Arenia, all of them have done things and been given a second, third, fourth chance. And Oak, growing up in that, doesn't need to be told. He has seen that and absorbing that. And so I think that's his way to show love, like, because he's so desperate for love too, is he shows his love by giving them another chance, because that's what he has seen in his own family. Once again, I love the fashion and outfits, and am I going to put more meaning into them than they probably are? Yes, I am. So we get Carden's description. He's wearing a doublet of a high collar and crisscrossing pattern sewn into dark fabric. Aside from shining buttons in the shape of beetles, he looks positively staid. And so like the crisscrossing pattern to me felt like slashes. And so like I wonder if it's a representation of the attempts on his and everyone else, the royal family's lives, the assassination attempts. Obviously the dark is to go into this, the costume, his persona of this villainous, cruel king. But also the high collars to protect himself, that he is kind of like making himself a lot more guarded, but also it's protecting again in the sense of like armor, because the buttons are beetles. Beetles have a hard shell, so his outfit is his armor. Taryn, meanwhile, is wearing a lilac jacket, tulip sleeves, breeches. It's very, very feminine, but the lilac is innocence, first love, tranquility. And again, I think that's also a costume. I think she's presenting herself to be a lot more innocent and sweeter than she is. It's a wolf in sheep's clothing kind of thing. We know that Taryn is not as innocent as she's presenting as a costume, just the same way as Carden's. It's the inverse of Carden's. Carden's presenting himself to be worse than he is. She's presenting herself as more innocent, and I'm not saying any hate on Taryn. I like Taryn. I hate all the hate on Taryn. I think that is unjustified. Not unjustified, but I feel like it's hypocritical when Jude and Maddox are 1,000 times worse, and I like the two of them. But the ghost, meanwhile, is dressed in gray, and even Oak knows that it looks like a night, that they're like this romantic kind of pairing going on between the two of them. Meanwhile, like, she's riding a toad, which I feel like kind of shows her common beginning. Like, it's not that common. Obviously, she's higher up than others. You got to be educated with other nobles, but like, she used to ride a toad back in the Cruel Prince, whereas the other nobles, like Carden, Oak, and even Taryn, are riding horse or steed-like creatures. And she's also wearing a dress of unskimmed cream, the color of a thin vest with gold lacing. So the white and gold make me think of bridal, but also it's like a yin and yang between her wearing white and Carden wearing black, that they balance each other out. But it's so thin, whereas Carden's felt like armor, the high collar, the beetle buttons. Hers feels like she's leaving herself out open, vulnerable, sacrificial, like she's luring people in to come and attack her. But I also wonder if like the color and things is a representation that it's like she's having a renewal, a revival ever since Ren lifted the curse. No longer a hand stained with blood with that curse, maybe? I don't know. Jude's is like a little bit more complicated and like harder to decipher, I feel like. So I love that like Oak is telling us that like he can't judge by Jude's expression, body language, what she is thinking, and even if he asks, she is a major liar and would be next to useless and possibly even affect Ren negatively. And meanwhile, Carter's watching him, and I love this because it's like so high tension, like it's like a shootout in an old western. Simultaneously, it's so different than Game of Thrones, because for the most part, you could depend upon your family. Very rarely in Game of Thrones did like family members betray each other. It only happened on a rare occasion. It's more so with like the Targaryens. But like here with this family, there's been just constant betrayals amongst themselves that like, of course, Carden be looking at him warily, because he's watched it firsthand happen on numerous occasions with Dane betraying their family, with Balkan betraying their family, Balkan betraying him, Carden technically betraying Balkan, Maddox betraying Jude, like all these different layers. So like, of course you'd be wary of your family, and it adds this like new twist and dynamic to the relationship that like They love their family members, they're loyal to their family members, but they don't trust their family members. So in this moment, I'm kind of loving the differences between Jude and Oak while simultaneously being similarities. The two of them were raised under Maddox, two of them raised to be a little bit more cold-hearted, to be fighters. And yet you see Jude does have some humanity to her, but she does lean into that. She recontextualizes things in her brains, rearranges it to then be able to fit into her morality or be comfortable with it. Whereas Oak, you can see that he still struggles with it. Even though he's killed people before, he has to turn his brain off in order to achieve it, but he keeps himself emotionally distant. But when he's close, like for example, Lady Elaine, he is morally struggling with this, even though he is fully aware she's involved with a potential conspiracy theory, not very conspiracy, like a coup. He can't bring, when he thinks of her being tortured, he hesitates to rat on her. And I think that's where you see he is soft-hearted. He is kind, and he is just trying to pretend like he is like the rest of his family. He's putting on this mask, this cosplay, this character, and yet simultaneously at the core of it, that's not him. He's trying to force it to be, but it's not. I love this brief little moment because you can read it and just kind of skim past me like, oh, this is normal. But if you stop and think about it, it shouldn't be. And it's when one of the courtiers, I think, of Alfheim says that they can't possibly catch a silver stag with two mortals there. They're too noisy. It would scare the beast off. And saying it loud enough meaning for Jude to hear it. And yes, in the last trilogy, that would have been normal, but think about it. It's been 10 years, the two of them there. They should be scared to say things like that, but they're not. They're emboldened. They feel safe enough to say these kind of comments now, which means that the coup they think is strong enough, has a strong enough potential that it would actually come into fruition, that they feel emboldened to say these things. So either Lady Elaine's group is a little bit more powerful than the others, or I think it's because Maddox is there. And Maddox is probably involved with Lady Elaine's, or has at least involved himself now, if not previously. And Maddox has run technically a successful coup with Balkan. It didn't work to fruition, to completion. Completely, Jude kind of stole it out from underneath him, but technically he kickstarted it. Technically it worked. And he is technically a strong general and has a, again, Oak as the figurehead of this. So what this is briefly telling us is that things underneath the surface at Alfheim is not solid. It is rocky, and there's a lot going on that we aren't privy to because we are in Oak and Ren's POV. And to continue, Jude tests them by saying, we could shoot birds, falcons, hinting at Ren's men, but also playing fox. Now the guy reacts we can go for a ride. He could be frightened by the fox, but she could also be testing him, watching his reaction to see how does he react to shooting at Ren's men. Has he already has Ren's side already grown in strength with people of her own court? And to end this video, Oak noticed Lady Elaine whispering to Lady Asha, Cardan's mother. We know Cardan's mother is very scheming, very power hungry, and so she equally is involved, which we should be worried about. But why is she talking to Lady Elaine? Elaine wants Oak on the throne, but Asha's Cardan's mother. What is she intending with this? Also, Lady Elaine turns away quickly and doesn't make eye contact. What is going on here? There's a lot that we aren't being privy to, a lot going on underneath the surface, and it kills me that we don't know. So I wonder if it's going to come up in the next book. We're getting more outfits this time with Ren, and it's described as Ren is in a dress of pale gold. A chain veil is on her head set with shimmering aquamarines, and aquamarine can symbolize hope, courage, wisdom, rebirth, tranquility, which all these fit Ren, especially the rebirth we see that she's about to go through that soon. But the thing that caught my attention was obviously the symbolism towards the sea, because now I'm wondering if it's trying to be a subtle hint that there's obviously upheaval with this undersea and a possible power change, and maybe this is the two hags, so Bogdana and Mother Morrow's hint to certain followers that you should back them because they're going to be siding with the new potential power of the undersea. And we do know that the next book is going to be in the undersea. There's obviously something going on politically there. But also, the gold chain veil immediately made me think of Jude and what she had worn in Queen and Nothing when she went to go fight Snake Carter. She was wearing a golden armor that used to be Queen Maeve's. And the chain veil goes to the armor, but it's a veil, and she's wearing a dress, which is a very feminine version, much more than Jude wearing, armor. So I wonder if this is also symbolism to certain people that are very misogynistic, that Ren is going to be more feminine, the more
typical version of a queen where she is not exactly completely powerful and ruling in a more masculine sense like Jude is. She's going to be a little bit more puppeted, is the sense. But again, with the gold is also symbolizing that she is a queen, maybe even bringing others to mind the exact same image I had with Jude, but in a more feminine way, so that might make others more comfortable. Not only is she of the folk, but she is going to be a much more feminine version. Again, for the misogynistics, I'm rambling, but yeah. Oak then describes Ren as looking very bridal, and here's the thing for those who don't know, white as a bridal color is a still fairly new concept. It became popular thanks to Queen Victoria, so that was about 1830s, I want to say she got married. Don't quote me on that, it was like 1830s, 1840s, but before that, it was just whatever was your richest, most fancy dress and fabrics. And so gold often was used by royalty. I believe Princess Charlotte, possibly Queen Charlotte, had gold in their dresses, but whatever was your richest, most adorned fabrics of that time. And so to me, I think it's interesting that like Jude and Ren are marrying into princes of Elfhame, tying themselves to Elfhame, but Jude is the new way, the new bridal color. Ren is a symbolism of the old way, the old bridal colors. And so it makes sense too that like Jude is presenting herself as the new way, the new change, the new future, whereas Ren is a representation by those who want to overthrow Jude and Cardan of the old ways, of upholding the old system. I love this conversation between Oak and Ren, where Oak says, "Tonight I must ask you a question. What if it's impossible to respond to what I ask incorrectly?" She says, "You would bind me to marriage unwillingly." And I love it because it's a perfect representation of everything going on in this universe that Holly Black has created. And like I brought up many times before, where the dialogue, that there's nuance to it. It's layered. There's a multitude of things going on at once. And you say, even here, something as commonplace in fairy tales and folk tales with something like a riddle presented, and then you get to get married, or just simple like kind of game you have to complete, and then everyone lives happily ever after. But here is showing that the world is not black and white, it's nuanced. And in this scenario, you either direction, there's problems. If she answers it correctly, she be bound in a marriage that she may be unwilling towards, that she still is uncertain about it. Even though she wants it, she's uncertain about everything and doesn't trust everything, and knows that there's going to be problems that come with that from maybe Jude's side. But if she answers it obviously incorrectly, there's going to be problems coming from Bogdana's side, from another side, that there's no way of winning, that she's backed into her corner, and any solution she tries to make is going to cause problems. And that is frustrating for her, and I completely understand her for that. Oak says to Ren, "Am I supposed to declare that I was swept away first by a whim and then another?" He asks, blithe as ever. If her shield is coldness, his is mirth. Here on one note, I love that if her shield is coldness, his is mirth, mirrors very similar to Jude and Cardan. The only there's a slight difference though, they're not perfect mirrors of one another. While Jude could be categorized as slight coldness, hers is a little bit more anger and a need to prove something, and suspicious, and a slight hostility, where it's, she does have coldness, but not on the level that Ren has coldness. Same with Oak has mirth, so did Cardan, but Cardan's was a little bit crueler, as we know, a little bit more aloof. But what Oak is saying here is that he wants to be taken seriously. He wants to break free from this character that Ren herself says that she doesn't trust, and she doesn't want to be with him if he is like this way, but she is asking him to be this way. He wants to change. He wants to break free from this mirth, aloof, kind of foppish prince. He wants to be serious. He wants to, show the real self, but Ren's asking him to be his fake self, but then doesn't want him because of his fake self. Again, just like what I said at the end of the last video, where Ren's backed in the corner. No matter what decision she makes, there's going to be problems. There's going to be consequences. It's the same with Oak. He has backed himself into a corner, and no matter what decision he makes, it's going to cause problems. Either it's not going to work in this situation, or it is going to work, but then Ren doesn't trust him, or there's going to be problems from other people, or people aren't going to believe him because people already don't believe him because of how he's been portraying himself for over the years. There's just so many problems. And I love this because it's showing that everyone's actions have consequences, and that's amazing thing to see with characters, because I feel like I've been seeing it rarer lately in books, but like it's showing that like the way that you're presenting yourself will bite you in the ass no matter what way you do it. Heartbreaking thing about their relationship is this like unnecessary miscommunication or this unnecessary need for a performance. Because, for example, here she's saying that we could have a spectacular fight, and he's like, what would the fight even be about? And she said Lady Elaine, which we know, knowing her, that she probably is very upset about the whole situation with Lady Elaine from the previous night, but they're gonna be veiling it as a performance, but really there's so much truth to it that she would have a fight with him about it, but she doesn't feel like she can have a fight about it with him unless she's doing it for a performance. Where like it's so sad that they feel like they need to have this performance, but yet the part of the problem in the relationship is that they think that the other one's constantly performing, kind of thing. So like it's such a heartbreaking situation with a relationship where they're such tangled up in this knots because of who they are in their positions, and it's causing problems. Like, while they might have some privileges because of their positions, they obviously come with a lot of, red tape and a lot of issues within itself. And I like that this is what Holly Black's showing, that because you're a prince, which Jude fought, Cardan's a prince, he gets everything he wants. It comes with its own set of problems. You know what? One of the reasons why I really do like Oak's story, which like I understand why people don't as much as the other, but the reason why I like it is that these two, Oak and Ren, are the original two pawns to greater schemes, and still are continue to be pawns to be used by others. So they're completely bound up. They're like, agency is limited, but yet they still have agency, as Holly Black is proving. They're still making their own choices and decisions. The plot and other characters aren't directing things for them. Like, it's not like the whole thing's happening to them. While a lot of the stuff is taken away from them and things are happening behind the scenes and directing them in certain ways, they still are making choices, and their own personal choices are causing consequences and conflicts in itself. And I'm saying this because I've read a couple stories where like it felt like the main character was just being shoved around by other characters, or the plot itself, that they had little to no agency. Here, even though these two characters are total pawns and completely being used and moved by others, they still have a lot of agency. I've said this before and I'll say it again. One of the reasons why I love Holly Black is that there's a subtlety to her writing, a layerness. In a world where stories are telling you the story, and now we're getting reports that screenwriters are being told that they need to tell things, like tell character motivations things. So when we're getting a moment like this where Renia goes up to Oak and says, "Have you come up with your question for the girl?" He shakes his head. "Ask her your fondest memory," she urges slyly, "or perhaps your deepest secret." "They're clever questions," Oak says. "They seem difficult, but she might well be able to guess both. Not a bad suggestion." Nothing is said plainly. Like, you have to kind of momentarily stop and think about it, but it's an easy thing to decipher what's going on. But like, if anyone was listening in, you would not be able to figure out if Arenia wants him to trick her or if she is trying to be helpful. Whereas Oak then is shooting her ideas down, pretty much saying that she knows him better than Arenia thinks, that they do generally like each other. So I like that it's not in plain written English. It's subtle, but it's an easy thing to decipher, but there's something to engage the readers with. I've previously talked about how Oak and Ren are the original pawns. They're being used, they're very well aware of it. They still do have agency while others are trying to dictate their lives, but they are pawns, and Oak's very well aware of it, as we see here, where like he notes that even though Arenia says that she does not wish for him to go for Nacia's hand, nor thinks that Jude does, he assumes that if Jude does plan on him marrying Narcia, she hasn't started the process of, swaying Arenia to her side. And the part of the reason why Oak thinks this is because, like I've said previously, this family doesn't communicate. They might love each other, might be loyal, but they don't communicate. And we know from past history that they use one another. That Jude and Maddox use their family members as pawns. While Maddox is a little bit more crueler than Jude is, Jude still does. She still used Oak and Cardan as pawns to achieve an end, because she didn't want Maddox to do it. It doesn't, while she is the better of the two options, it doesn't dismiss that she did exactly what Maddox was planning on doing herself. She used others to achieve an end that she wanted. And this isn't to hate on Jude. Like, I love Jude. I think she's such a fascinating character. She's so dynamic. I just don't like when people kind of like ignore her rougher edges to smooth it out so they can hold her up on a pedestal as this like badass icon of a girl boss. But like, and then like tear down others like Taryn, because in all honesty, Jude is more manipulative. It's just that we've been in her POV, and heard her justifications and been swayed by her justifications and think that she is the better of the two options, but she's still not perfect. She's still pretty terrible and manipulative and using others. When Arinia hands Oak red clover tea, it's fascinating because, like, one, he knows that there are crafts of wine, but she hands him this tea. Now, red clover is believed to be this mystical plant favored by the fairies, but it has a multitude of like meanings and symbolism, and a couple of them is like prosperity and love. So it's fascinating that Arinia is handing him a tea made of a plant that symbolizes love, where she is then asking him, like, what is this question towards Ren, but she doesn't want this to exist, like this like alliance, this love that's supposed to be like she's trying to destroy it, but yeah, she's handing him a cup of love. And then the next page, Oak notes that he wants to dump this tea over Taryn's head as she's standing there next to the ghost's horse talking to Ren, because he now knows that Taryn knows about the ghost and his ghost's relationship to Oak and his mother. And it's like, I think he does love Taryn, but in this moment he's so angry that he would be willing to dump it all out of this cup. This whole thing with Oak and Hyacinth and the vow that they have that Oak would unalive the person that had poisoned his mother and attempted to poison him is brilliant, because it's doing what it's like kind of fixing what the Cruel Prince didn't do, in the sense of unpacking how gray everything is. In Oak's case, everything is so much more convoluted because he's not in the midst of a web. He's like in the midst of a giant ass knot. Like, this is showing not only the toxicity of revenge, but in his case that things are not black and white. It's gray, that like he by picking at this knot, he uncovered that the people that he loves in his life have been lying to him and withholding this information, and like having his mother's murderer so close in his life and even training him. But yet, if he follows through on this vow, and he has to follow through on this vow because it's binding in this world, he'd be potentially destroying his relationship with Taryn, who obviously has something going on with the ghost. And yeah, at the same time, like, so like everything's great, everything's nuanced, something that we didn't really go into that hard when it came to the last book, like, why Jude unalived Falcon and how that is so complicated for Cardan. Like, we brushed past it, but we didn't dig into it. We didn't really see how hard it was. And even Jude's decision to not unalive Maddox, like, we didn't dig into how complicated that was. It was just kind of like, this is what's happening. But this is also going into what was happening with Balkan and Maddox and all the others. Who is worthy of redemption? Who is worthy of a second chance after doing something? And that's such a complicated question that you're never going to get a straight answer to. I cannot tell you exactly what I think happened with the ghost or who did it. I think maybe we might know in the next book, maybe, but I don't think we're going to know. But I am now this read through wondering if the ghost had done it himself, if the information he wanted to reveal to Oak was that he uncovered that Oak had made a vow of Hyacinth to unalive his mother's murderer, and he was going to reveal that he is that person, because he's the one that brings the wine, and he even notes that not good wine, but wine nonetheless. And you would think for someone that had worked for Dane, who had been a spy assassin, would be more suspicious of this, and maybe like Jude would have been taking poisons over his lifetime to become accustomed, but yet he doesn't. And it would make sense that he would then choose one that wouldn't affect Oak, but it would affect him. And I also wonder this because he says that, like, Oak's like, I can't talk right now, but he says, come find me when you're ready, but it must be soon. Maybe being aware that the effects of this wine is going to take him sooner than later. Holly Black's also really good at having characters make a wrong assumption, where, like, in this case, Oak assumes that the ghost was being stupid. For all that he knows about poison, he used the one that Oak is immune to, and maybe he's not aware of that, but I think the ghost is very much aware of that. And it's just like, Holly Black does this with a lot of characters where they assume the opposite of what is the truth, but it makes sense that they assume that, and it pushes the story forward and creates this more dynamic character than one that knows everything and is right about everything. Also, I think that the ghost could have done this to preserve Taryn and Oak's relationship, that he realized that Oak's hand would have been forced and this would have destroyed their relationship but by doing this himself, or doing it like this, Oak then doesn't have to follow through on his vow. And I think the ghost wants to preserve Taryn and Oak's relationship, but also realizes that the ghost has been given this privilege to exceed his, comeuppance, that he's been able to live a relatively happy life for the last handful of years, but his comeuppance was always going to come, and I think he's walking into it willingly. And the chapter ends with Oak wondering, like, obviously the ghost didn't do this himself. He drank the wine unknowingly, but it's possible that he did drink it unknowingly and it was manipulative. We may not know till later, but it's equally possible that he did it himself. But I like that, once again, Oak is making this false assumption, because I think he doesn't want, your first thought isn't doing something like this because he's not at the age and experience to think like this, but also like what that would mean and how to unpack the emotions around that. It's much easier to then hope to find someone to blame. And that's the thing of the story. It's the thing that the like revenge toxicity is constantly looking for someone else to blame. Taryn's reaction to the ghost dying is interesting. Not only her screaming, high keening sound, her shaking him, showing the magnitude of the relationship without telling us it, but like always inferring. So we don't know concretely, but we can infer that most likely they did have a relationship. But then her to look up at Oak, her gaze so full of grief and accusation that he had to look away, is fascinating to me. Now there's a slim chance that maybe the ghost had figured out that Oak is aware and was aware of this vow, and that was why he wanted to meet with Oak privately to tell him that was the thing that the knowledge he had, and maybe he made Taryn aware. But I feel like that is slimmer than maybe Taryn just automatically assumed Oak capable of this, not only because he is one of the folk and she assumes the worst of the folk, even though she wants to be a part of this world, but also because he is part of their family, and their family does have a history of violence, of murder, going back to Locke's quote in Wicked King, your family would be surprised that killing doesn't solve everything. We would be surprised. So I love that even though the ghost or someone else had taken away this choice from Oak, where he would have to decide of following through with his vow, even though there really isn't much of a choice. He was being forced to kind of do it, but still there was some agency within this, even though he's being forced, which again, this is why I love Holly Black, that even when you're being forced by the plot, she still had agency. But even though that was taken away from him, he is still reeling with the emotions and the decision, him thinking that he never really knew his mother, but he knew Garrett, and he hated him, or I should have hated him. I wanted to hate him. He didn't kill him though, but he might have, he could have, could he have? And I like that he's having this kind of like existential crisis of like, is he really capable of doing something to someone that you genuinely know and you're close to, even though they wronged you that hard, which is mirroring nicely to the decisions that like Carden and Jude had to make when it came to Balkan and Maddox, for instance. Okay, so I think I'm one of the very few, or if only person in this fandom that would love another story or novella from Taryn's POV, because for instance here, not only would I love to know about her relationship with the ghost and her son, but also, the fact that she automatically looked at Oak and assumed he had committed this crime, where she's not completely wrong. Her family does have a track record of doing this, and he is one of the folk. But then when Carden leans down and puts a hand on the ghost, she looks at him, angrily and, hesitantly in a way. She doesn't seem happy about it, and Oak notes that they've never really had a happy, good relationship. So like, I'm just curious of like what her life looks like. Like, she wants to still exist in this world, a world that has brought her a lot of pain, but also a lot of good, and what it would mean like for her to like exist in this world that's not really brought her so much joy, and to exist so close to the people that she doesn't trust, but yet she loves them. So I would love to unpack like the whole thing of like loving someone but not trusting them, because that's the whole problem with this family. They love each other, but they don't trust one another. Maddox, Jude, Taryn, Oak, all of them, they love but don't trust. So the interesting thing is that Carden sends everyone away, which to me is interesting because in this moment, even Oak notes that for all his extravagance, right then, he looks like one of those paintings of the high kings of old, somehow moved into the realm of myth. And he's displaying this extraordinary use of magic that he has. No one else can match him for. And you would think he would show it to his couriers to remind them what he is capable of, but yet he sends them away. He wants this private moment. A part of me wonders if Holly Black is potentially leaving a door cracked for another story besides just the Undersea, which she has been hinting at, but also a story for Taryn and the ghost, because she asks, will he be like this forever? Alive but in prison, dying but not dead? And Carden says, I don't know. Because it feels very reminiscent not only to The Darkest Part of the Forest with that Fae Prince who was in a sleeping curse in a glass coffin where mortal kids would hang out and party around his coffin for decades until finally he woke up. But a ton of other fairy tale and folktale stories I just can't think off the top of my head. But this feels like a setup for a potential story, which again, as I said earlier, I'm totally down for. I would love to see Taryn's perspective, because Taryn's perspective of the world and her experiences are now very different from Jude's. And I'm very curious about the whole potential idea of love and trust. Like, you love someone but you don't trust them, and why exist in a world that has caused you pain. And like, I think her more than anyone, she could exist in either the mortal or the Fae world. And why does she choose this one specifically? Because I feel like she could have belonged better in the mortal world. So like, I'm just curious about that more. So Oak says that it probably would be best to leave the milkwood. And milkwood is a tree, and it's more commonly found at like coastal South Africa, but it represents strength, resilience, but also standing in your own power. And it's interesting that this whole thing with the ghost and Oak and this whole interaction here is occurring in the milkwood, where you're standing for your own power. And this is, I think, a moment where like Oak needs to stand up for himself and decide what he's going to do in the case of Ghost, but then like Cardan is standing in his own power, the way that he changed the ghost into a tree. And then also Oak looking just now at Bren, being like, silently begging her to stand up and defend herself when Taryn threw an accusation at her that she was behind this. So for those of you who haven't read like the Dive series, this duology would be the first time that we're in a Fae's head and see their restrictions, whereas like, the original Cruel Prince trilogy is in Jude, she's immortal, but like here we see the restrictions of not being able to lie. Like, we've always been aware of it, but like in the case of here where Ren says, do you think I'm responsible? Oak wants to say no, of course not, but he isn't sure he can make his mouth spit out those words because he doesn't know if it's a lie. So like, there's still like, there's loop arounds of being able to twist your words, but even deep down he isn't entirely sure, and because of that he can't say those words because he doesn't know if it's a lie. And so that's like a fascinating thing that's holding him back, which is causing a problem. But the fact that she's wording her question like that, she should have known it setting up. But at the same time, I'm not surprised Ren wouldn't know, because she hasn't really existed in this world that much. She's been existing on the peripheries between the mortal and the Fae world, living isolated. We get this like really beautiful bit of imagery, in my opinion, because in this instance, while Ren and Oak are having this conversation, like, do you believe me? And he says, I would believe whatever you tell me, nor will I look for deceit in your words. All the while, Bogdana in her vulture form is on Ren's shoulder, and she's like kind of glaring at him and digging her talons into Ren's shoulder, piercing, and a trickle of blood runs down her dress. And I love it because it's wonderfully showing us that Ren is still in the clutches of this predator, of this creature that's trying to use her, manipulate her, that she's not completely free, not completely, has her own agency, that she's still caught. And it's showing us without telling us, and like, you can see it and see, like, note, like, that's weird if you're a first read through, for instance, like mine, but because this is my second read through, you're seeing that like, oh, there's a lot more going here. It's showing us that this is all happening without telling us this. Why are you flying off the handle? Like, that's what's running through my head as Taryn's like listing all these things. She's like, I don't trust these, you should arrest them, blah 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 blah. And then like in the back of my head, I'm wondering if Maddox influenced her. And in part because I don't trust Maddox at all. I think that he's involved still in some way, even though I have no proof of it, but maybe in the next book I will. But I wouldn't be surprised, because we saw how Maddox manipulated and used Taryn previously. So even if it's not as opaque as, say, when he convinced Taryn to impersonate Jude to get Cardan to release him, Maddox from his vow, he could have been saying words in her head for the last couple of days about things like, we shouldn't trust these people, look what they can do, they're, we shouldn't trust outsiders. So then when a moment when she has someone that she loves is potentially dead and she's in this heightened emotion, she's leaning onto these prejudices that Maddox has been whispering in her ear, potentially. Again, I don't have proof of this. I wouldn't be surprised though if this is the case. I do love seeing Cardan take command of the situation, and it makes sense because technically he's the High King. Like, while him and Jude see themselves as equals, others see him as the one actually in charge. But also it makes sense because Jude is a little close to, it's a little personal. It's her sister that is making these requests. It's her sister's supposed love that got her. It's supposedly Oak that they're questioning and Oak's fiance. So Cardan is at least neutral enough to make these demands, but also I don't know. It just like makes the most sense, and I like that he is taking command in this instance. The really annoying thing about this current situation, because there's a lot going on, is that like Jude says about Ren, she didn't deny it. She isn't denying it now, and it's like randomly putting faith in the fairies' words because they technically can't lie when we know that they can manipulate their words, and that we had seen in the original trilogy when Jude constantly doubted, for example, Cardan's words. When Cardan was being extremely truthful, she would then convince herself that he was twisting his words and lying and making fun of her. So who is to say that even if Ren did deny it, they wouldn't be twisting it, thinking she's just manipulating her words, manipulating her assumption of the situation, but she is behind it in some way or form, because that's what they do, that's what they believe, and that's what they've seen with others. And this is like just a piece of many other pieces in this puzzle where Oak and Ren are constantly kind of backed in the corner, and no matter what direction they try to turn or do or say, it backfires on them and they're going to be doubted. So there's no winning. So Oak says that he doesn't know if it's because of the blushing mushroom or out of sheer frustration from the moment, but he blurts out that the ghost had poisoned his mother, and that's why he should be considered a suspect for his murder. And I think it's more so the latter, because he is frustrated. Go back, I think 2 chapters ago, when Oak was kicking at the table, breaking it, and he notes to himself that his mother would be frown upon his actions, but he doesn't acknowledge that he has so much pent up emotions and no one to talk to. This is the normal reaction to teenagers. It's the same reaction we get from toddlers. When they can't find a way of communicating, they react, they have tantrums, they break things, and it's because either they don't know how to communicate it or no one's listening to them. And that is Oak's problem right now. No one is listening to him because in this family they actually don't communicate. They might show through actions maybe that they are loyal and care for one another, but they do not communicate. They do not share it verbally. And they keep secrets from one another constantly. So it's such a weird linking between this family. Like, why are they still a family unit when you have nothing to kind of hold up any form of loyalty? They claim there's loyalty, but there really isn't. They backstab one another. They don't trust one another in their own schemes. There's so much that should have broken this family apart, but yet they haven't. And I also like this moment because it's showing Oak's age. He is, I think, 17, 18, 19. He's teenager. His frontal cortex isn't fully developed, and he's frustrated. So him reacting this way, while it seems foolish and almost childish, it makes sense for his character. I said this at the end of the last video, but I love that Cardan stepping up and where he chooses to step up. Knowing in this moment, in the last moment, knowing Jude would be a bias, so he steps up and takes control of the situation. But also in this one, he knows that Jude is stunned and someone needs to say something, so he steps up and says something Cardan saying, "You make a very good point. You had excellent reason to try to kill him, but did you?" And I like seeing this dynamic that they're both on the seesaw, and one might step forward more and the other might step back in one situation, and then vice versa. So no one has complete power. They both are kind of equal, but it's just depending on the situation and depending on how they want to present themselves to others. And to reiterate what I had said earlier in this video, Oak literally says, if my family had their way, this isn't a conversation we'd have at all. Again, going to the lack of communication and constant secret keeping. Lady Elaine dying from potentially the same thing that the ghost did is a wrench in this. I don't know how to decipher, because I thought maybe the ghost did it to himself, or at least he might have been fully aware of it. But if someone had poisoned it and given it to Lady Elaine, what does that mean? I think no matter who have done it, which in my opinion, in my first impression would be Maddox, just about to shoot somewhere in the dark, it's to then point more blame towards Ren and that party to, further divide the two, because Lady Elaine, in others' opinion, would have been at the top of the list of other potential, brides for Oak. Someone that others had courted and wanted, but at the same time, the ghost could have given the poison to Lady Elaine, seeing her as the connection bridging Oak to this conspiracy. And if he can cut it off, then at least it would protect Oak for a little bit longer. At the top of page 275, Oak thinks to himself. His mind turns to Ren with the vulture's talons digging into her skin, her blank expression. He keeps trying to understand why Ren endures it without crying out or striking back. While Oak and Ren have a lot of similarities, there is big differences too. Oak, even though I've just talked about in life that his family is not very verbal, they don't really communicate, he has always been given a space and the agency to say something. It doesn't mean that they're actually listen and follow through and believe or do something about it or even allow him a seat at the table, but they've always kind of given him that agency to say something. Whereas Ren has always been beaten down, meant to be ignored, meant to endure pain. And being back in Alfheim, I wouldn't be surprised if she reverted back to that version of herself. It's kind of like when you go back home for the holidays after you move out and you and your siblings, despite being in your 20s, 30s, 40s, somehow always kind of revert slightly back to your childish self and have childish like bantering and fighting, and you're like, I'm an adult, why am I acting like this? It's being back in that same environment sometimes brings it out in us. This is another great example of like Holly Black's use of characters and their development, because characters don't change overnight, or at least they shouldn't, and they should fall back on old ways. It's a steady change, a steady growth. And even though Oak has undergone so much and acknowledged that he has and has changed his thoughts and values and wants to be different, in moments of high tension, he still reverts back to his old self. And I say that because here in this moment, while everything is, going to shit, he wants to take Ren and run and go hide in the woods behind maybe her mortal family's home. And that's exactly what he had wanted to do when he was a kid. He ran to her, and she had to be cruel to send him back because she realized that no matter what, someone would always come looking for him. And you can't just hide from the world. At least he can't just hide from the world. She could, because no one was looking for her. And it's just funny that, like, despite them actually having this conversation previously, I think in the last book, he's still reverting back to that. He's still realizing that he hasn't quite realized that he can't run away, especially him. Like, that people are going to come looking for him, and he's going to have to confront all these things still. I've talked about this in many different places in every single one of her books. Holly Black doesn't do things just because. So even if it's a description detail, there's a reason for it. So example here where she says, above them the black bees and the milkwort buzz, carrying nectar to their queen. Late afternoon sunlight turns the pale trees gold. The latter part, late afternoon sunlight, it's one we're on the cusp of a changing up between night and day. And you could also acknowledge that like night is more their formal time of being awake, as we had saw in the original trilogy. So this could be they're on the cusp of a new day for them, but also at the very least, it's the cusp of something changing. We're about to change into something else. Something's about to happen. We're on the cusp of something new. But on top of that, we also have the bees carrying to the queen. So there are a lot of little worker bees carrying something to someone else. And I think that's like a very sly, subtle hint that Lady Elaine, the ghost, all these other people, they're all just the worker bees carrying the nectar to the queen. But now we have to figure out who the queen is. Is it, Jude? Is it Ren? Is it Bogdana? Is it Maddox, who is puppeting all these puppets? Like, someone is the center of this, and we haven't quite figured out. And I think even at the end of this, I don't think we have quite figured out who is the center of it. I think Bogdana might have been a front, but I could be wrong. She could be the queen, but who knows? So the Roach tries telling Oak, after Oak says, like, I thought that the ghost had poisoned me, that the Roach says that the ghost would not do that. He's been trying to redeem himself. That's why he gave Locke his true name, and Locke's not a person to trust. On one hand, I wonder if the ghost was ordered using the true name to do the poisoning by Maddox. The ghost has a history of using this poison. He's an assassin. It would make sense. And Maddox does know his true name, and Maddox is back in the picture. And I think that Maddox is like the big villain in the background that we don't know yet. I don't know. I just don't trust Maddox. But at the same time, we have to acknowledge that they don't really know the ghost. They thought that they knew the ghost, but then he betrayed them in The Wicked King by giving Jude up to the Undersea, and the Roach and the Bomb were surprised. They thought that they knew him, but he's proven that they didn't know him. So, but yet they were willing to give him another chance, and over these years they thought that he was redeeming himself, but who's to say that they truly still did know him, that he wouldn't still do something like this because of something else? Oak acknowledges that when they pass the Lake of Mask, that it never reflects your face, that it always reflects someone else's, whether it's from the past or future, and he sees a blonde pixie laughing as she splashes someone else, a man in black with salt white hair. Recognizing neither of them, he turns away. Now, it's been years, and he probably didn't even really acknowledged them when they came to crown Cardan because he was a kid. But I think that's Kay and Robin, and I think it's done in part as a fan service, a little Easter egg, a little wink wink to people that know the couple, but also I think it's done as like a very sly way that Oak's not even realizing, as a way to acknowledge that him and Ren have a chance. That Kay and Robin's, the thing standing between them is similar enough to Oak and Ren in the sense that like they wanted to be with each other. Both of them did, but Robin was pushing her away, thinking that he was too dangerous for Kay, and that feels very similar to Ren. While Oak's looking across at Incir and acknowledging the Mandrake Market and the Tower of Forgetting, like they're all kind of like on separate islands. Like Alfheim's made up of many islands that are interconnected and like easy to get to, obviously, until the storm hag has her storm and then she cuts them off, isolating to one sole island. And the thing about Alfheim is that like it's seen by themselves and by some others as this like pinnacle. It's where the high court is. It's where you aspire to be. But yet, like, they're an island. Like, they're so removed from everyone else from the mortal world. While they can reach the mortal world, you have a harder time of crossing the ocean to get to them. And they seem better than, like, the other courts who are neighboring the mortal world. They're closer tied to the mortal world. And while this might keep them safe from outsiders and others within even their community, it simultaneously isolates them and allows for these biases and prejudices to brew a lot more easily than in the other courts, for instance. It's the little details that I love that you pick up more so like on second read, for instance, like Oak noting that there's a guard he didn't recognize nods to them, and you might dismiss being like, of course you wouldn't know every guard, but then the guard says there's tents for your refreshments, yours is marked with your father's sign. Again, you can dismiss it, wave it off, but to me, I think it probably, like, why is he purposely pointing out his father's sign? Why is his marked with his father's sign? Why doesn't he have his own sigil? He is technically the heir. Like, for example, the Prince of Wales is probably his own sigil usually. Don't quote me on that, but I just, like, I don't trust Maddox, and many people are probably wondering why I don't trust Maddox, and it's because he's told us himself in the original trilogy that he wants war. That's what he thrives off of, and I don't think he's going to change his ways over these years. He probably has been itching for a fight for even longer. It's been brewing up inside of him, and we saw like him stir the pot in the original trilogy. Lady Elaine dying, I think he did on purpose because he wanted them to blame Ren and her people so then they can start fighting because he wants a war. The other thing I love about Holly Black is that she takes a detail, for example, like Oak thinking about how Ren said, I'm not the one who needs saving, and Oak thinking like she couldn't have meant that. She couldn't have meant that she murdered Lady Elaine. And that is not the case, but like it's so, like, you know, as a reader that it's probably not that, but you don't quite, like, you understand why he thinks it's that. And so like you have a detail like that that can go in numerous different directions. It's the same with like what people say, the dialogue. That was why I love Cardan's dialogue, because you can interpret it in so many different ways, and that's what led to a lot of the conflicts and misbeliefs and jumping to conclusions, because what they said or what they did can be interpreted in so many different ways, and that's what makes her story so brilliant. It leans so much into the world of like the fact that they can't lie, they're very clever, their words, but at the same time you still have trouble trying to decipher what exactly they are trying to say. If I read just a little bit more, because it's been like almost a year since I've read this book last time, the father's sign isn't like Maddox's, but still I think Maddox is involved, but it's Dane's crest, which goes into something like with the ghost, where you have people upholding Dane, living through his image, wanting him. A lot of people wanted Dane to be king. A lot. Even Robin sided with him. So it's not surprising that people would want his son instead of Cardan and Jude, especially those who hold up on prejudice against mortals. I know this is probably getting really old, but I don't trust Maddox as far as I can throw him, and I doubt I can throw him an inch. But like, even though Oak is in a tent with Dane's sigil, his birth father, I think Maddox is possibly doing this on purpose to rally the troops, to rally all those who had once supported Dane, because Dane did have a massive following previously. A lot of people wanted him to be king. And so they could be like, his son's close second, why not do that? And that's what Maddox is hoping. And I'm saying this also because as Oak enters his tent, Tatterfell is there. We have to remember, Tatterfell is like technically Maddox's servant. She's working a debt off Maddox. Even though Maddox had sent her and assigned her to help Jude back in Wicked King, it should have been a red flag to us that when Jude tried to waive the debt, Tatterfell got mad and said it's not her debt to waive. So for all we know, Tatterfell could have been acting as a spy for Maddox this entire time, because technically her alliance and her debt is to Maddox. Even though Oak is put into a tent with Dane's sigil outside of it, he is being dressed in a burgundy doublet. And we have to remember the colors of Elfhame is green and gold, so if they really wanted him to uphold Elfhame and the Greenbrier line, they would put him in green and gold, but they're not. They're putting him in burgundy, which is a deep red, like blood. And that's more of Maddox's colors. Think back to even like the blood ring that he had given to Jude, the one that she had on her finger that Cardan slyly took off and was wearing for a period of time, then gave back as their wedding ring. He is associated with blood colors. When he eats, it's bloody. So even though he has the sigil of Dane, he is being dressed more so, I feel like, in Maddox's colors. And that is showing, I think, the truth of the situation. That, like, on the outside, it might look like he is a representation of Dane and continuation of that line, but really he is kind of smothered by Maddox. And to reiterate that, when he goes to Jude in Cardan's tent, he sees that Cardan is in white and gold again, but Maddox is dressed in deep red. And I think it's to visually show to other people which the sides, if that makes sense. In previous videos, I mentioned how we've kind of reached a point where Oak and Ren can't do anything to win. That they're backed into a corner where no matter what word or action or anything that they do, it's gonna backfire. It's gonna cause some problem that they can't win. And it's kind of the same here, where like when Oak is noting that Rennie is keeping Leander entertained in the corner, and it reminds him of his own childhood, that she used to keep him away from dangerous conversations, distracting him. And he says it was a kindness he knew, but it made him vulnerable as well. And pretty much no matter what anyone had done with parenting, that it's probably going to backfire in some way. You try your best, but it's not going to be perfect, in the sense of, like, you know, Rennie and Jude trying to give Oak a childhood, a genuine childhood, but in the end it left him vulnerable because he's been naive and people still think him as a child and don't incorporate him, and he's out of the loop on things, and he's easier to manipulate and puppeteer. Whereas if you had a childhood like Jude, who is up, you know, close and personal to this level of violence and manipulation, you're going to get paranoid and you're going to have a control issue, which she still does. Jude's question to Oak is very important, because she says, why did you bring her here? What did she promise you? This world of Elfhame is give and take, and Jude is very familiar with this give and take. However, Jude is familiar with a physical give and take. Like, you know, you do this and I'll give you a dress. You do that and I'll give you a crown. Like, things physically, like, even like, you know, become Dane's assassin and get to have a geese. So it's very physical, whereas Oak and Ren's is more of an abstract. Like, the reason why he did it, because give and take still exists, is that he loved her and wanted to protect her, and he thought that this was the best way, that even though he brought her into a viper's nest, so this is what they had to give up, this, like, be under this, like, magnifying glass now, but by keeping her close, that meant that he could have a higher chance of keeping her safe, because if he had left her behind at the Citadel like she wanted, he couldn't ensure her safety, that, like, you know, Jude and Elfhame's army wouldn't come up to her door and he wouldn't be there to help prevent anything. So they both had to give something up, and they got something advantage, that they were still together, and that even though they don't see themselves as a united front, they kind of are a united front. But the other thing is that it's showing that Jude still sees him as an innocent, that she thinks that he got swayed by some grand promise, by something, and it's sad that she doesn't truly see Oak still. The view looks a little different because it just feels like one of those days to sit on the floor, but you can see my family's cat behind me judging me hardcore. But I just picked up on a detail that I didn't notice the last time. This is only the second time I'm reading this book in particular, and it's that only 3 members of the Living Council are in attendance: Fala, the Fool, Randolin, and I am not going to pronounce this name, but the representative is Seelie Court. And even though the Seelie and the Unseelie are kind of both ruled by Robin, they had 2 representatives, because remember, the Seelie and the Unseelie representatives were always getting fights to be on opposite sides during the Cruel Prince trilogy. So where is that person? And we have to remember also the Unseelie are a little bit more known for their bloodlust, similar to Red Caps. So it wouldn't be that hard to sway them by Maddox towards his side and wanting a war potentially. So Oak says that, like, telling her now everything that he should have revealed to her all these years would feel like peeling off his skin, which is completely true. And I also think it wouldn't have done anything beneficially. That Jude has this thing where she kind of has a hard time changing her perspective of people and their characters. That she has this idea of Taryn, and when she deviates from it, she still doesn't quite change her perspective of Taryn. Same with Maddox, same with Carden. When Carden would outright tell her that he loved her, she would not believe it. She thought he was interesting about Oak is that he is so similar to Carden and Jude, yet he is farther in his character's development than they are. That, like, he does things like keep back secrets that wasn't his to keep, and he acts in this particular persona like Jude and Carden. Yet he is out loud recognizing that these are bad things and that he needs to change his ways, and this isn't working. This is what's causing problems. Whereas for Jude, for example, when Oak said that she put me in prison because I kept it back information that wasn't mine to keep, she goes, and? Because then she would have to come face to face with the fact that she still does that. She still is very closed off. She still keeps back secrets that probably are not hers to keep, calling also her out for keeping back the secret about the ghost. But, you know, the two of them keep up this character too, which makes sense for the roles that they have right now, but at the same time, like, it's causing problems. As we see here, this kind of lies and deceit are causing problems while it keeps them momentarily safe. And Oak's recognizing this and wants to change it. He's not quite there. He hasn't completely changed yet, but he wants to more than Jude is acknowledging and wanting to change herself. And this is why I think Jude and Carden are coming back in the next spinoff, because they still have more growth there. While they have changed and grown since the beginning of the Cruel Prince, there's not completely like a 180 yet. It's not a complete change. They have more to grow and change, which also makes it feel so much more realistic, because no one changes drastically overnight or over the course of one trilogy. Like, I think your characters should still have some more room to grow, because that's what makes them human. I also love that Carden just instinctively whips up his cloak to protect Jude, because his cloak's like made by Mother Morrow and like can protect her from the bolts coming her way. And I love that even though he is not a swordsman, he does not have that instinct, he does have the instinct though to protect Jude, and it's really cute to see here. Because of Randallin's reaction, him looking smug and satisfied as he stepped away from after, stabbing Carden in the chest, I think we can infer that the bolts were never really fully intended to kill Jude. I think it would have been a bonus if he got rid of both of them. I think it would have been safer for them if they were able to get rid of both of them. But yet, Randallin didn't go to stab Jude. He went to stab Carden. And is smug about it. And I think that's very fascinating to me. Him, who is so elitist, who is so speciest, where he thinks that, the Fae are above mortals, doesn't try to kill the mortal thinking that it would change Carden. I think he already sees Carden as too far gone. That even if they get rid of Jude, it wouldn't change things. But if you get rid of Carden, Jude has no claim to the throne, paving the way for Oak to take it then. I will admit, Maddox can breathe and I will be suspicious of it, but I don't know. Something about this is just waving a red flag to me. Like, yeah, he is in a fighting stance, but he's not doing anything really. Like, Maddox and Jude could easily get rid of these 7 guards, but Randallin felt comfortable enough to do this because I think he thinks that Jude is the only fighter, not considering Oak. And also, Maddox in the past we've seen has such a strange relationship with Jude, where he sees her as like an extension of him and like is protective of her and Taryn, but at the same time is not. Like, he had tried to kill Jude in the past in Queen of Nothing, but yet we saw the extent of like damage and what he was willing to do to get Taryn back. Taryn in the beginning of Queen of Nothing, when he thought that she was being questioned by Carden. So he picks and chooses, and I think he does see them as pawns, and if it benefits him in the long run, he's willing to let them fall. And again, he has attempted on Jude's life before, and I don't think he likes Jude and Carden in charge and sees them as an obstacle. So I wouldn't be surprised if he is kind of behind this too. Like, I don't trust him. While Randallin does admit that he gave Garrett the wine, he's too good at his job to not be suspicious. And why give it to Garrett to give it to, like, I don't know, like, who did he intend, like, to give it to Oak? Like, why? He's, like, I think he knew what he was doing when he drank the wine. I think he knew the potential of it. I just don't know why he did it. I think part of the reason why Oak so willingly allows himself to slip from his consciousness to go into his fighting part is that I think he's had enough. Like, Randallin being like, I did this all for you. Everything in his life has been for him, but hasn't been for him. He has had no say in anything leading up to this point, including even Carden being stabbed now. And I think he's had enough, and he's trying to yank back his agency. And if it means doing this to completely remove the mask to show what he is capable of, then have be it. But I think he's also hit his breaking point of wanting to be able to dictate what his life looks like and not have everyone tell him what it is. And I think this will still go over Maddox's head. Maddox would just see this as an advantage of, look, Oak is the stronger person to put on the throne because look at him fight, unlike Carden, who can't fight and has to depend on my daughter Jude. Maybe Maddox isn't thinking like this. I don't trust him. And I know Holly Black loves Maddox. I should be thinking of Maddox in a slightly more positive light, but I think he's always up to something and we should not trust him. We can still like him even if we don't trust him. Jude's reaction following this event of, like, Oak definitely killing a lot of the guards, but there were others there to help. She turns to Maddox and goes, what did you do to him? And I think it's so fascinating because they've always seen Ren as a monster, afraid of the potential of what she can do because she looks monstrous. And yes, she does have this amazing, great power, but at the time they didn't know that. But yet Oak looks so simple, aloof, kind of toothless. And yet look at this great, look at his sharp teeth now. Look at what he can do. And to Jude, again, she has trouble trying to contextualize this new information. Instead, would rather blame Maddox. Maddox caused this. Maddox turned this part of him on. And in part true, but in part it's useful, obviously, because it keeps people safe, and Jude would have kept him toothless if it meant that he could also be innocent. And innocence, though, kept him at risk and dependent. And so this is such a weird kind of thing going on of also blaming others and not realizing that she's equally at fault, not realizing the benefit and helpfulness, but also, like, no matter what you do, there's going to be a problem. There's going to be a conflict, a consequence to every action, every decision. But also, once again, ignoring Oak. She doesn't ask Oak, how did this happen? What happened? She's having a conversation with him there as though he isn't there, talking to someone else. A reminder, the Fae can't lie, and that's what's leading to a lot of these problems. One of them believing Oak genuinely did want Carden gone and Jude to take the throne, but also Carden genuinely believing that they should not forget about Oak, that just because your brother killed Randallin doesn't mean we should forget he was at the center of this conspiracy, and that he is at the center of whatever Bogdana and Ren are planning. So I think he does recognize that, like, even if he is not aware of what's going on with Bogdana and Ren, he's just being used by them, he still was part of a conspiracy and we shouldn't trust him. And the reason why Carden believes this is because it's happened to him in the past. He has seen and been a part of his brother's willingness to see him dead in order to get the throne. Between Dane and Balkan, they were willing to go to whatever lengths to get rid of the competition, including Carden himself, if it meant that it would secure their place on the throne. And so, because of Carden's experiences and believing maybe it's just in their nature as Greenbriers that this is what's going to happen, that they all want the throne, that they're willing to go these lengths, that it wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility that Oak also could be like this. And that's what makes it so heartbreaking, is that all their false assumptions is grounded in a truth. That there is a reason why they believe this, and that you can see why they believe it, even if it's not the actual truth. It's not far from the realm of possibility. I also love and hate that Oak kind of wanted to remove the mask and show his family that hey, I can take care of myself, you don't need to baby me. But at the same time has mixed feelings that they now see, and I think the reason why he has mixed feelings is that he didn't really get to choose this, that they were thrown into a situation that he had no role in and had to react, and now his mask was kind of forcibly removed and now has to deal with the aftermath of everyone's emotions and recontextualizing what they think and feel about him. And I love that Oak brings back that Ren once described what she was afraid of if she revealed herself to her family. And I love that Ren and Oak are so similar that they're kind of foils or mirrors of one another. But like Ren is the physical manifestation of everything he feels, whereas Oak is the internal. And it's so fascinating that like everyone reacts to her physicalness. That like physically she seems evil, but internally she's actually kind. And Oak outwardly looks like he would be kind, but internally does have this kind of monster in him. He is still a kind and good guy, but there's a monster in him that's just like you're judging by outward appearances, which I think is one of maybe the themes besides loyalty and family and things like that. It's also that you can't judge a book by its cover. Just because one looks more monstrous doesn't deem that they automatically will be, unless again it's a self-fulfilling prophecy in the sense that you push them into being that, or one that seems so angelically beautiful doesn't mean that they couldn't equally be monstrous if pushed into it. I think a bit of Jude has rubbed off on Carden. Now, I will admit he also is actively bleeding out, so that might influence him. But him, when Jude asks him, like, what is your role in this? And he's like, I'm not giving you any of my confidence. Carden just says, kill him. Because in the original series, he was the one that's like, killing doesn't solve everything, kind of quoting similar to Locke. Locke said that, definitely said that, and I'm pretty sure Carden said something very similar, like, let's do something other than killing. But yet here you just see him, he's like, kill him. Also, continuing that, Carden was someone that more so wanted to give people second chances, whether it's Balkan, Nicaea, and others. In part, I think because he had more of a tie and had that desperate need to still earn their love. And I think it's easier for him to then say, let's just kill Bogdana and run, because he doesn't have a tie to them. But it is also interesting that he is jumping to this conclusion a lot faster than he would have previously, I feel like. Oak also saying that Carden said this in that silky voice, sounding like the boy Taryn and Jude used to hate, the one that who Hyacinth wouldn't believe was any different from Dane, the one who ripped the rings off the Pixie Boys and made his sister cry. It's showing that I love it because it shows that Carden, while has grown and changed, reverts sometimes back to his old self when put in a situation. He is actively bleeding. They were put in a dangerous situation. He's also saw Jude's life almost ended too. So because of that, he is reverting back to his old ways, because that is like a baby comfort blanket to him, and it makes sense. There's one aspect about this world that Hollyblock has created in the title of the series, which is Folk of the Air, that I cannot quite figure out why they're called Folk of the Air, because most of these creatures are grounded to the earth. Look at Carden's magic. The Greenbrier's magic is tied to the land, whereas the hags, who are treated as others, like they're an older, more archaic magic. For example, Bogdana is obviously tied to the air. She's creating storms, so why are they not the folk of the air? Why are the others, these fays that we are more associated with, the folk of the air, when they're obviously more tied to the ground? I also think it's so fascinating, this line, Bogdana has sailed off Inseer from aid, keeping Elfing's military and all else who would help them at bay. But that's the thing. They've always been removed. They've always been cut off. Like, they were an island in the middle of the ocean, whereas the rest of the courts are more like scattered around, like America, for instance. A lot of them are, like, a couple of them are in Maine or New York, example, in like the Tive and Darkest Part of the Forest series. But they've always been removed, yet that is their weakness, is how removed Elfheim is. While they somehow have convinced others to be under their command, under their control of the Greenbrier line, that when they call to arms they should respond, but they're so removed that it's always been easy to attack them in that way, and it's surprising that they haven't been prior to this. And this also goes back to how Elfheim always thinks themselves so high and mighty, but like their power and their strength has all been an illusion, a shadow on the wall, to quote Varys from Game of Thrones once again. That like, yes, they have strength, but like it's all tied to vows and alliances, and look how easy you can separate them. The other thing I like about Holly Black is that she doesn't spoon feed us things, and like even has her characters making wrong assumptions. In this case, Oak saying like, what was the intention? He hasn't married Vren yet. Randallin probably assumed that they wouldn't find the ghost or Elaine's body, but I think like if you take a step back as reader, you're going, that was probably not the case. If you really think about the characters and their wants and needs, you should probably have always had a red flag that Bogdana would have been willing to have Oak keep around? No way. Like, maybe use him against Ren, but like for most part, she wanted to destroy all the Greenbriers, and he's a Greenbrier. And she would have wanted the throne anyway. She was just using and manipulating Randallin, similar to how Maddox does, using his prejudices to then have him, clear the field to get rid of the other people and hopefully have them all fighting trapped on this island, so then she can swoop in the aftermath and seize the throne like she always wanted. But Holly Black doesn't tell us this. We as readers, though, have all the puzzle pieces that we should easily figure this out on our own. What Oak thinks to himself here, he's becoming the fool he spent so long pretending to be. If he hadn't fallen in love, then no one would be in danger. If he didn't believe in Ren, promised to be on her side, make every excuse for her, then Randallin's schemes would have come to nothing. This paragraph, to me, mirrors a moment that Jude had when Cardan exiled her doubt, her like, if I hadn't believed him in that moment and put my guard down, if I hadn't fallen for him and acted foolishly, then I wouldn't have been exiled. But like, we learned later that Cardan had a scheme and he thought that she would have figured it out, not believing in her biases. And it's the same thing here with Ren, that Ren's not doing anything wrong. She's just trapped in a web that she can't she's like knotted up and like can't find a way out without causing more problems. So she's not at fault, but in this moment with everything going to shit, Oak obviously is having a moment of doubt in trusting her, just as Jude had a moment of doubt in trusting Cardan. In the previous chapter, Oak brought up to himself that while Irenaea was protecting Leander, that her and Jude keeping him safe only made him more naive and more susceptible of being used, and actually affected him. Having a part in the human world, like every other decision in this universe, has its plus and minuses. While it's made him more compassionate towards mortals and has him being more compassionate just in general, simultaneously makes him naive to the manipulations of his own world. While he is very much aware, he sometimes forget, and I'm bringing that up because here he says to Jax that after this, your debt to me will be more than paid. You will owe me nothing. Perhaps you will even be the one with a favor to call in. I should enjoy that, Jax says with a sly smile. He forgets how the rest of the world, the rest of the Fae, especially those around Elfland, those who are so separated from the mortal world, do lean heavily on this give and take, that they will call in the favor, and you should not leave it open-ended because it will backfire and bite you in the ass. Something June knew because she was forced to know and taught to know, but that's something that I think Oak being one of the folk and then being simultaneously removed made him naive to, because he's they would just assume that he would know because he's one of them, but at the same time he was removed from that kind of cunning and slightly selfishness that he doesn't see this as a potential danger. This line from Jax made me think of something. He says, "Not even a small bite? You're making it hard to be merry, your highness." And it reminds me so much of Locke and Valerian. Remember their relationship with Cardan. They used Cardan because they offered him the opportunity to make merry, to do whatever they kind of want, their heart's desire, and get away with it. And that was the purpose. That's what they want. And I think that's what the folk want deep down, at least the core, most of them, that unless they have an interaction with mortals, unless there's something happening like with Cardan's case, they just seek to make merry. And to make merry, there's a selfishness and leaning into their inner instincts. They can't control it, as they often blame. Look at Locke and Maddox, often saying that it's within their nature that they have to act like this. But then when you look, compare them to others such as Grandma Mog, who's another red cap, saying, I would never have harmed my own daughter the way that Maddox has, or, Cardan, who does not act the same as Locke, or even Oak, who is of the same creature as Locke. It disproves that nature versus nurture theory, that their nature does not command their every decision. They allow it to command their every decision. This interaction with Jax and using him to get to the other side is such a great example of Oak's strength and character, because he's willing to put himself at risk for a potential greater good, because Jax can't even promise that he can ensure Oak's safety to get to the other side. But Oak is putting a lot of trust in this creature who has betrayed them in the past, which again, that kind of leans a little bit into Jude and Taryn and the rest of the family, that even though the rest of his family continue to betray and harm one another, they keep coming back to one another. And like it's weird, like his family, they don't fully trust each other, but yet they have this tie. And I think Oak just interprets it as trust, and so he is very willing to give his trust away so freely. And this is a plus and minus. Like, it's a good thing, and sometimes it works in his favor, and like in this case, but other times it works against him, like with others. Like, so I like the rest of the story, every decision you make, good or bad, has a consequence, good or bad, in response, and that's how it should be in stories. I just had an epiphany reading chapter 22, and it has to do with the drowning motif that I talked a lot about in the original Corpus trilogy. You saw it often throughout the three books, whether like directly or indirectly, just a way of describing things. And to me, it was used to represent that to be a part of the world of Elfin, you needed to nearly drown, to nearly die, to be a part of this world. It's almost like the afterlife. And Elven's always been described as overwhelming for your senses, for your sight, smells, taste, all that. But like, to truly be a part, you needed to drown into it. And there's a reason why it's an island across the ocean. You know, same with the mortal servant that Jay tried to save in book one, but she threw herself over. And then we see her possibly reappear with the undersea court, the coronation, as part of the drowned victims. She's officially part of this world after she drowned in it. And Jude described a lot of things, like when she's taking the poisons, like a drowning similar sensation. And even after she was kidnapped and brought to the undersea, the version of her that reemerges is very different. And immediately after while she's trapped in Maddox's fortress, she describes a drowning like sensation as she's trying to reacquaint herself back to the world of Elfheim. And I'm bringing it up here because Oak is nearly drowning during this whole excursion with Jax trying to get him to the other side. And the version of Oak, I think, that emerges on the other side is going to be very different. While Oak was born and technically is a part of Elfheim, he's never really been a part of Elfheim. He's been kept on the periphery, kept out of the loop, kept in the mortal world. He's never really been a part of Elfheim. But the version of him that's going to emerge on the other side is truly going to have to be a part of Elfheim. He's no longer on the periphery. He is fully in both feet. He has to be cunning. He has to be witty. He has to, understand that not everyone is worthy of his trust in this world, that everyone is playing a game. While he recognizes that people are probably doing something, up to something, and are being selfish, he never fully knew it till this moment. And I think in order to get out of this situation alive and to help Ren, he's going to have to fully, lean into being Fae. I also love that it's kind of like great imagery of like when Oak looks back, he sees that the storm is kind of isolated to just the one island. And I think it represents perfectly that sometimes to be in the eye of the storm, you need to get out of it to solve the problem. That with Jude, Cardan, everyone there, they're in the eye of the storm. They're in the midst of all this scheming and plotting and, challenges and things like that. And in order to solve it, though, you need to sometimes get out of the middle of it to find the real solution. And that's what Oak's doing here. He is out of the eye of the storm, and that not only is offering him some clarity, but also a solution. Also, going back to what I was saying in the beginning of this video, we haven't quite reached it yet, but he is about to have an interaction with Mother Morrow, and it's a very classic fairy tale, very classic Fae. The setup, the riddle, the hidden objects, and I think it's the most Fae-like thing that could possibly happen. And so for him to emerge after being drowned in the first kind of like challenge that he faces is so classically Fae, makes sense. It's like you fully need to engulf who you are and what you are in this world, which is so fascinating too, where like I think one of the many themes of the story is traditionalism versus new ways. Jude and Cardan are paving a new way, and their conflict, the people fighting against them, is traditionalists. And there's such plus and minuses to all this. Obviously, like the new way brings some great things, and it brought some compassion to Oak, but it simultaneously made him naive to the old way, to the way that others live and act. And so like there's more that I could probably unpack here, but yeah. It's a little detail I didn't pick up on my first read. On page 299, Oak's as his honey mouth charm comes easily this time, the burr in his voice just right, "Ren," he says softly, "I was looking for you." And what we've learned earlier in this book is that when he uses his honey mouth charm, it usually has him saying things that the other person needs to hear to sway them. And I did notice that, like, that's what Ren needed to hear. That's what Ren wanted to hear, was that Oak was looking for her. And it's just so heartbreaking because, like, the two of them are just caught in the middle of this political mess between Oak's family and Bogdana and Maddox and everyone. The two of them don't want to be involved at all in that, but like at the heart of it, that's all Ren wanted, was for Oak to look for her. But he's done it a couple times, but she continues to push him away because she thinks she's being kind of selfless to push him away. That to keep him is selfish, and she did that once already at the end of the last book, and look what it got them. It's just sad because at the heart of it, they do want each other. I really love this little detail where Oak says that, like, Ren's headpiece is missing and that her hair's falling loose down her back, and Holly Black doesn't put little details in just because. She's very conservative of her words and spacing, and so there's a reason, and I think the reason is to show to us as the readers that this is Ren. This is the truest form of Ren. She's not wearing a mask. She's not playing a role because no one is behind her, forcing her to do it or puppeting her or in fear of something happening if she doesn't play this character. This is her truest form, talking to Oak in this moment. Ever since at least entering Elfham, this is the truest version we've gotten to see. And it's so ironic because that's one of the reasons why she is frustrated with Oak and pushes him away, is that he's constantly playing this role, this character, this mask, and yet she has to do it herself in Elfham. And it's so sad that, like, to exist in Elfham, you kind of need to, because we see all the other characters. We see it with Cardan and Jude and Taryn, that they had to put on this performance, this mask to protect themselves and to advance in this society. And, like, what does this say about the society? And I really hope in one of the future books, like, Holly Black really unpacks that. Just stab a knife into my heart because it's so heartbreaking when Oak says, "We can get married here right now." And she says, "We can," like wistful. And he says that he's promising her exactly what she wants. That's how his power works after all. And he doesn't realize that the first thing he says, that he was looking for her, that's what she wanted. And he's twisting this, that, like, it makes sense because of everything leading up. Like, it makes sense that he would think the worst in this situation, but, like, the reason why she's wistful is that to her, it shows that he still wants her despite all this. To him, it seems like she's saying yes because she needs him to be able to get the throne, and it's just heartbreaking. This moment here of Oak and Ren, of him offering to marry her, this private moment, to me mirrors so much to Jude and Cardan's marriage moment. And when I say mirror, in my head, I imagine it as it looking very similar but inverse, if that makes sense. So Jude and Cardan had that private moment, and the entire time Jude was looking for a trick. She didn't believe him, but yet her ambition and slight, like, without even, like, fully admitting to herself that she really wanted to be with Cardan, and she tried to, like, amass that want to be with Cardan with, like, ambition, had her finally saying yes. And when he seemed like he betrayed her, she believed it fully because she was blinded by her biases and beliefs, false beliefs. But he was always on her side, and he was hoping that she would see it. Whereas here with Oak and Ren, they're also having a private moment, and Ren is not looking for a trick. She believes him and wants it so much, and wants to believe him so much that she's willing right then and there to marry him. And yet Oak is trying to trick her. The only reason why he doesn't follow through in stabbing her is because he thinks of something that he said earlier in the book, where Hyacinth said that you're so much like your father, and Oak says, if I love someone, I wouldn't kill them. And one of the main reasons why he doesn't do it here is because he doesn't want to be like his father. But it also reminds me so much of, like, the White Cat, in which Holly Black has talked about in an interview being one of her favorite fairy tales. And in it, like, there's three princes that have to prove themselves of who should inherit the throne to their father. The youngest one's an idiot and finds this cave of a white cat, and she helps him win each challenge. And at the end, he has to come back with a bride, and she tells him to stab her. And he's like, "I don't want to. I love you." And she goes, "No, no, trust me. You need to stab me." And when he does, she bleeds out and then emerges as a beautiful young lady instead of a white cat. But, like, it's so fascinating in the sense, like, Holly Black is twisting that as, like, he wants to do that, but Ren shouldn't have to be stabbed to emerge as this other version, that he should love her for her. And, like, her transformation later is done by herself, kind of thing. I like that. But, like, there's more to unpack. I don't know. I'm getting really long and rambling, but this was fascinating. And I like the mirroring between Oak and Ren with Jude and Cardan, and the similarities, but yet differences between moments with the four of them. Oak is clever, but part of his personality is that he acts first and then thinks second, which makes sense for his age. He is 18, doesn't have a fully developed frontal cortex. And not having fully developed frontal cortex doesn't mean that you can't be smart, can't be clever. We see him being clever, we see other people being clever. It's just that you're more likely to react first, and not saying that you can't just react first after you have a fully developed frontal cortex, but still. But with him, it's part of his personality, I feel like, and we've seen it here where like he had to rush to get to Ren, get off that island, and it's only when he's looking at Ren goes, huh, I think this is a riddle. Because why would she tell me to not trust her and to be clever and end the betrothal if she needs to be married to me, if we were going to if she was going to kill Cardan and my sister to get the throne? And I just love that, like, he acts first, like he was panicking to get to her, and the moment he's with her, he's like, maybe I need to be clever about this. I personally believe that your romantic characters should have similarities and differences, something about them that is different, that brings out something better within the other, or even worse if you want to bring out that kind of relationship. But there should be similarities too, something that makes them compatible. And in this case with Oak is him realizing that Ren loves her more to family. She loves him so much she slept in the dirt near their house just to be close. Loves him so much that there might be nothing she wouldn't do to save her mother or father or sister. No one she wouldn't sacrifice, including herself, which is exactly what Oak has been doing too. Oak has told us throughout this book that he is willing to throw himself into the fire if it means, protecting his family. He does love his family despite all the secrets and betrayals and everything. He still loves his family, and he wants to prove his worth. I don't know, like with Oak, I think it's so tough because I don't think he's fully unpacked his feelings. I think there is love, but I think